What if I told you that one small trio from Kingston quietly rewired the DNA of reggae, and, by extension, modern pop and soul, long before the world even knew the word reggae? Long before Bob Marley became a global voice, there were three young dreamers, Leroy Sibbles, Barry Llewellyn, and Earl Morgan, harmonizing in the heat of Trenchtown. They didn't have money. They didn't have fame. But they had something more powerful, a sound that could turn struggle into beauty. These were the Heptones, the quiet architects of a revolution in rhythm and harmony. They shaped the bridge between ska, rocksteady, and reggae, not with shouting, but with precision, soul, and bass lines that still echo through today's hits. But their rise wasn't clean. Behind the sweetness of their harmonies lies a story of struggle, of creative battles, betrayal, and the cost of carving out a new sound in a world that wasn't listening yet. Why does it matter? Because every bass line you feel today, from reggae to hip-hop, carries a fingerprint of the Heptones' genius. And yet, most people don't even know their names. This is the untold story of the trio who built the foundation of reggae and changed music forever. In 1965, Kingston, Jamaica, was pulsing with sound. Radios crackled with the upbeat horns of ska, jukeboxes spilled laughter and rhythm into the humid air, and every corner seemed to hum with possibility. Yet, beneath that bright pulse, the streets told a harder story. Unemployment was high, the island's politics were turning volatile, and the people in the crowded yards of Trenchtown were fighting to stay hopeful. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, across town, young men with guitars and homemade amps were changing the world without even realizing it. The clubs weren't fancy. The microphones were second-hand. But what Kingston had was raw creativity. Kids who'd grown up singing in church choirs or around backyard fires, now plugging into sound systems and trying to make something their own. Hold that sound in your head. Now add the tension of a country on the edge of independence, wrestling with its identity. Music wasn't just entertainment, it was therapy, rebellion, and sometimes survival. Out of this pressure cooker, a new rhythm was forming. Ska, the island's signature sound, was slowing down. The frenetic tempo softened, bass lines grew deeper. The beat hit just behind the pulse. It was the birth of Rocksteady, and it needed a voice, a harmony that could carry both joy and pain. Here's the piece almost everyone misses. The Heptones didn't fall out of a record deal. They were built in the trenches, literally, in Trenchtown. Leroy Sibbles was a quiet, determined teenager who'd grown up surrounded by the hum of street music and the sermons of Sunday mornings. He wasn't just a singer, he had an ear for structure, for how notes fit together like puzzle pieces. Barry Llewellyn brought warmth and soul to the trio, his voice the kind that could turn a simple lyric into confession. And Earl Morgan, steady and grounded, filled in the harmonies that made their sound whole. They called themselves the Hep Ones at first, a name that said they wanted to be sharp, in step with the times. The word hep meant cool, alert, alive. But soon, as their chemistry deepened, they became the Heptones, a name that hinted at perfection, the 7 tones that make harmony complete. By day, they hustled through Kingston's rougher corners, running errands, working odd jobs. By night, they sang anywhere someone would let them, under streetlights, in the backs of sound system yards, in the open air of neighborhood parties. Their practice space wasn't a studio, it was the echoing walls of their communities. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, across the city, Studio One was beginning to rise as the heartbeat of Jamaican music. Coxsone Dodd, its visionary producer, was gathering singers and musicians from the streets, giving them a place to record. But getting through those gates wasn't easy. You needed more than talent, you needed persistence. And persistence was something the Heptones had in full supply. Their early recordings were rough, but filled with promise. Tracks like Gunmen Coming to Town and Fatty Fatty, songs that captured the grit and humor of the streets they came from. Their harmonies were tight, soulful, and unmistakably Jamaican. Hold that thought. Before they ever touched a major studio mic, these three young men were learning how to translate struggle into sound. Every note carried their surroundings, the crowded yards, the laughter, the fights, the hope that things could still get better. Here's the piece almost everyone misses. What the Heptones were doing wasn't just making music. They were rewriting the emotional tone of Jamaica's youth. They gave tenderness a place in a hard world. They showed that you could sing about love, heartbreak, and faith in a way that still felt streetwise, still real. By the mid-60s, Kingston was changing fast. Violence was creeping into the neighborhoods, politics was dividing communities, but the music only got stronger. The Heptones stood right at that turning point, between the optimism of ska and the deeper introspection of reggae that was about to emerge. So by the time anyone knew their name, the parts were already dangerous. Their voices were honed by the streets, their harmonies shaped by survival, and their rhythm rooted in a culture still defining itself. And that's where their story begins. Because once they stepped inside Studio One, the home of Jamaica's most legendary recordings, they wouldn't just adapt to the new sound. They would define it. By the mid-1960s, something electric was stirring on Brentford Road in Kingston. It wasn't a club or a concert hall, it was a studio, small and unassuming from the outside, but inside, it was the engine room of Jamaica's musical revolution. Studio One. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, across town, bands were still chasing ska's fast horns and bright tempos. But inside Studio One, producer Clement Coxsone Dodd was searching for something deeper. He wanted warmth, soul, a rhythm that could move hips and hearts at the same time. That's where the Heptones walked in. They weren't stars yet, just three hungry voices looking for a chance. They'd been singing in yards and street corners, polishing harmonies until they fit like gears. Coxsone Dodd heard them audition and instantly caught that spark. They weren't loud, they weren't flashy. But there was something hypnotic in how their voices wrapped around each other, smooth but unshakable, like church hymns raised in the heat of Kingston. Freeze the frame. Listen to that sound one more time. Leroy Sibbles taking the lead, his tone calm but commanding. Barry Llewellyn adding the pleading edge. Earl Morgan grounding it all. It didn't sound like a new act. It sounded like a movement waiting to explode. Once inside Studio One, everything changed. This wasn't just a recording space, it was a school. Under Coxsone's watch, young musicians were learning the craft of arrangement, rhythm, and tone. Sibbles quickly became more than a singer. He started hanging around the sessions, studying how Jackie Mittoo, the keyboard genius of the house band, built grooves that could hypnotize a crowd. Hold that thought. Most singers would record their vocals and leave. But Sibbles stayed. He wanted to understand why certain rhythms hit harder, how the bass line could drive emotion. Before long, he picked up a bass guitar, and what started as curiosity became genius. This is the piece almost everyone misses. Many of the legendary Studio One songs of that era, by other artists too, were anchored by Leroy Sibbles' bass. His lines were deceptively simple, but they carried stories. Each note had space to breathe, giving the singer room to live inside the rhythm. Then came the first shockwave. The Heptones recorded Fatty Fatty in 1966. When it hit the airwaves, Kingston stopped talking. The lyrics were playful, cheeky even, but the sound, slow, melodic, and soulful, felt completely new. It wasn't ska anymore, it was the future. Numbers don't tell it. This clip does. The song's warm, hypnotic bass line, the effortless harmony that made the rough edges of everyday life feel almost beautiful. Overnight, the Heptones became the name whispered in every yard and bar. The kids loved it. The old crowd didn't know what to call it yet. Too smooth for ska, too rhythmic for pop. But they all knew it worked. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, across the street, critics were cautious. Some said the music was getting too soft, that it had lost ska's energy. But the fans didn't care. They heard emotion, truth, and groove. And then the backlash landed. Fatty Fatty was banned on Jamaican radio for being too rude. But that only made it hotter. The song spread through dance halls and sound systems like wildfire. DJs would drop it late into the night, and the crowd would erupt. The Heptones had done what few acts could. They'd made controversy sound irresistible. By 1967, the Heptones were no longer just another trio. They were the house sound of Studio One. Tracks like Get in the Groove, Pretty Looks Isn't All, and Ting Aling carried that unmistakable blend. Sweet harmonies on top, Sibbles' deep, rolling bass below. Hold that sound in your head. Now add the influence of the people around them. Mitu's organ, the Skatalite's horns, Coxswain's ear for balance. Together, they built the blueprint for what would soon be called reggae. But this success came with pressure. Studio One was a factory of hits, and every singer wanted the spotlight. The Heptones had to stay sharp, constantly writing, recording, and evolving to keep their edge. Sibbles' growing reputation as a bassist only fueled the tension. He was now as valuable behind the mic as he was behind the rhythm. Freeze that moment in your mind, because this is where the Heptones did something few others could. They learned to control the machinery of their own sound. They weren't just performing songs, they were building them from the inside out. And in doing so, they set the stage for reggae's rise. A sound defined by bass, space, and soul. But success in Kingston never came without a price. As the fame grew, so did the expectations. And soon, the band would face a different challenge. How to take their message beyond Jamaica's shores without losing the heart of where it came from. By the early 1970s, the Heptones had become more than a harmony group. They were a mood, a symbol of Jamaica's shift from innocence to awareness. Their faces started showing up on posters, their suits grew sharper, and their sound, slower, deeper, wiser, was reaching people far beyond Kingston. Freeze the frame for a second. This wasn't the same group that sang Fatty Fatty and Smoky Bars. The world around them had changed, and so had the stakes. Kingston was restless, political tension was boiling, and music had become both a soundtrack and a shield. The Heptones' harmonies were still smooth, but now they carried questions about struggle, purpose, and the weight of being alive in a country fighting to define itself. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, across the island, reggae itself was evolving. Bob Marley was taking Rastafari and revolution to the world stage, Burning Spear was chanting history, and the culture of roots was turning every dance hall into a place of reflection. Fans weren't just dancing anymore, they were listening. The Heptones felt that pull too. They'd built their reputation on romance, songs about heartbreak, desire, and joy, but now the times demanded something different, and that's where Book of Rules comes in. At first listen, it sounds gentle, simple acoustic rhythm, soft harmonies, a sweet melody. But lean in, it's not just a love song, it's a life song. The lyrics are taken almost line for line from a 1920s poem, A Bag of Tools, by R.L. Sharp. The poem spoke of equality, of how every human, rich or poor, starts with the same basic tools to build their destiny. When the Heptones turned it into reggae, it became something more powerful, a sermon wrapped in melody. They weren't just selling music, as one critic later wrote, they were selling permission. The Heptones gave Jamaican youth permission to dream of more than the streets around them. Their music told kids that wisdom could sound cool, that you could dance to conscience. Solo the bass for a second. Hear what it's doing under that lyric. Leroy Sibbles plays only what's necessary. No flash, no clutter. Each note drops like a heartbeat. It grounds the message, keeps the focus on the words. And listen to the harmonies. Barry Llewellyn's tender middle tone softens the edges, while Earl Morgan's low harmony keeps it earthy, believable. It's not just a song, it's three people agreeing on truth in real time. One studio trick you can't unhear after this. The Heptones' vocals were often doubled just slightly out of sync. It gave their harmonies a shimmer, a living breath. You can feel it in the chorus of Book of Rules, that tiny delay that makes the harmony sound human, imperfect, and eternal. But here's what made them dangerous. In a time when radio was cautious and politics were touchy, Book of Rules slipped a message of unity and dignity past the gatekeepers. It wasn't protest music on the surface, but it hit just as hard. It said, everyone, no matter who you are, holds power in their hands. For a generation living under economic strain and political manipulation, that was a quiet revolution. And yet, not everyone approved. Some critics dismissed them as too soft, too polished compared to the raw fire of the new Roots acts. But that was the beauty of it. The Heptones didn't shout. They glided their message into your ears until you found yourself humming philosophy in the street. Hold that sound in your head. Book of Rules wasn't a one-off. Songs like Equal Rights, Party Time, and Country Boy continued that same balance of message and melody. They mixed soul-style chord changes with local rhythms, proving reggae could carry spiritual weight without losing its groove. And that's why copycats never quite felt right. You could mimic their chords, their tempo, even their three-part harmony, but you couldn't fake their chemistry. Leroy's bass was built from intuition. Barry's phrasing leaned into heartbreak without self-pity. Earl's steady tone glued everything together. Pull any one of them out, and the whole machine fell apart. Here's the piece almost everyone misses. The Heptones didn't abandon love songs when they got conscious. They expanded love itself. It wasn't just romance anymore. It was love of people, of justice, of self-worth. Their image wasn't rebellion through chaos. It was rebellion through calm. They proved you could look sharp, sing sweet, and still be dangerous. Freeze the frame again. It's 1973. The Heptones are riding high, their songs on every jukebox in Jamaica, their faces known across the Caribbean. But behind the success, the industry was shifting. Labels were chasing new sounds, and the trio's own ambitions were starting to pull them in different directions. And that's where the story turns, because the same calm that made their music timeless would soon clash with the chaos waiting outside the studio doors. By the mid-1970s, the Heptones had become ambassadors of a sound. What began in the tight rooms of Studio One now echoed across the Atlantic. Reggae was no longer a local rhythm, it was global currency. And the Heptones, with their seamless harmonies and spiritual groove, were right in the middle of that exchange. But with bigger stages came bigger pressure. The story that once felt like a fairy tale, three young men harmonizing their way out of Kingston, was about to collide with the machinery of international music. Freeze the frame here. Island Records, the label that turned Bob Marley into a global icon, had set its sights on the Heptones. The label wanted that harmony sound polished, accessible, and export-ready. For the trio, it felt like a dream come true, a chance to show the world that reggae could be elegant and real. Their partnership with Lee "Scratch" Perry was the spark that lit this new phase. At Perry's Black Ark studio, magic didn't happen by accident, it happened by design. The air itself seemed electric. Tape hiss, incense, laughter, and the occasional goat bleat from the yard. It all fed the creativity. Party Time, released in 1977, became the product of that collision between order and chaos. On one side, the Heptones' polished harmonies. On the other, Perry's wild experimentation, his love of distortion, echo, and unpredictability. The album was a reimagining, not just of their sound, but of their soul. Tracks like Suffering So and Storm Cloud carried emotional weight, while their rework of Book of Rules reminded listeners that the group's conscience hadn't gone anywhere. But listen closer, you can hear the tension under the surface. Perry's mixes swirl, voices fade in and out, bass lines bend in strange directions. It's thrilling, but uneasy, as if the ground itself is moving. That unease mirrored real life. Touring miles piled up. London, Birmingham, New York, long flights, longer nights, endless interviews. Behind the smiles and stage lights, fatigue was setting in. Fans wanted more hits. Labels wanted more control. The Heptones wanted peace. We're going to sit with this for a second, because this is where the story turns. The very thing that made them special, their unity, was being tested. Money disputes, creative differences, and the constant push-pull between art and business started to wear on them. Leroy Sibbles, the group's driving force, was also in demand as a session player, arranger, and producer. His bass lines were shaping half the reggae songs coming out of Kingston, and that kind of talent came with its own gravity. Slowly, cracks began to show. While Island and Perry pushed for experimentation, some fans longed for the pure Studio One sound, simple, tight, and emotional. Critics in Jamaica accused them of selling out, while overseas audiences sometimes misunderstood their message. Listen to how the tempo feels heavier now. Even the upbeat songs carried a weight they didn't before. Party Time, for all its brightness, sounds almost like a farewell. A band celebrating at the edge of exhaustion. Then came the cost. After the Island years, the group's momentum started to fade. Sibbles eventually left for Canada, seeking stability and creative freedom. Without him, the chemistry changed. The Heptones continued to record and perform, but something intangible, the pulse, the spiritual glue, was missing. Behind the posters was a price tag: sleep, sanity, distance. Fame had taken them far, but it also scattered them. The long flights, the endless takes, the industry politics, it all added up. The dream that started in a tiny Kingston yard had become a grind measured in airline tickets and studio bills. Most acts fade. The Heptones didn't fade. They fractured. And that's why the legend froze in time instead of softening with age. The harmonies we remember weren't just about pitch. They were about unity. Once that unity cracked, the magic couldn't be perfectly rebuilt. Yet even in their hardest moments, they left behind something unbreakable. Party Time became a cult classic. A snapshot of three men caught between eras, between the roots of Jamaica and the demands of the world stage. The Heptones had carried the sound of reggae's heart to new continents, but every journey that far from home comes with a cost. And in their case, the cost was the very thing that made them great, the bond that held them together. But here's the twist. The Heptones' story didn't end there. Out of the ashes of that exhaustion came something unexpected: rebirth. Because even when the world moved on, the echoes of their harmonies refused to die. Before the Heptones, Jamaican vocal groups were charming, precise, and local. After them, everyone chased that harmonized groove, the smooth yet grounded voices, the bass lines that breathed, the emotion that wasn't just sung, but lived. Even artists who have never said the name aloud are carrying the Heptones' DNA in their rhythms today. Spot the lineage. Listen to Sade's mellow soul, or the groove in modern reggae-inspired tracks from Damian Marley or Protoge. That rolling bass, those tender harmonies, that's Leroy Sibbles' fingerprint, stretched across decades. And the trick isn't just musical, it's emotional. The Heptones taught that music could carry honesty without shouting. One sample you've heard 1,000 times. Get in the Groove and other Studio One classics have been lifted, reworked, and woven into countless dubplates. Early hip-hop mixes, and even pop songs. You might not have realized it, but the Heptones' rhythms are under your feet, in your headphones, in your chest. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, back in Kingston and across Jamaica, tribute nights, mural portraits, and vinyl reissues keep the flame alive. Party Time, or Book of Rules, aren't just old tracks. They are templates, carefully dissected by anyone chasing the perfect harmony or soulful bass line. Modern reggae artists still study these grooves like textbooks, learning how three voices can tell an entire story without breaking the rhythm. Hold that sound in your head. Now imagine the afterlife of that sound. Archival releases from Studio One, live reunion tours, and YouTube playlists curated by fans who want the next generation to feel the magic. That's the echo the Heptones left behind. And it isn't fading, it's growing. Listen closer. What does a 2025 listener hear that a 1970s fan didn't? Today, we can isolate every bass line, every harmony, every production choice. We can slow it down, loop it, remix it. We can trace it forward to hip-hop, to pop, to dubstep. The lineage becomes clear. A single Heptones riff can teach decades of music history in one loop. Here's the piece most people miss. Their influence isn't just historical, it's practical. Every aspiring harmony group, every young bassist, every producer exploring the heartbeat of reggae is standing on the shoulders of the Heptones. And that's why listening to them today is different. It's not nostalgia, it's discovery. Your turn. What was the first Heptones song that hit you in the chest? Who deserves a full deep dive next? This is Reggae Subscribe so this history doesn't vanish in the algorithm, and dive into the next episode where we trace the rhythm lineage from the Heptones straight to the modern roots revival. We've traveled from Trenchtown streets to the world stage, from the hum of Studio One to the echo in your headphones today. The Heptones didn't just sing, they invited us to carry their sound forward. And now, it's your turn to keep the echo alive.